Okay, perfect. So let's get started. So here's a picture of me and just some brief overview what we're going to talk about in the next hour. I'll try to keep it very short and concise, but I'll try to keep an eye on the watch. But just for you, what we will talk about, just some general stuff about high school versus med school, because I assume many of you are first-year students. That's usually the biggest group of students coming to those events. And we're going to talk about very basic stuff. I don't want to talk about which books are good for you for anatomy and which histology books. It's going to be more broad, as a broad picture. And then we were going to talk about study methods, how you should approach studying at the first faculty of medicine. And I mean, what I have learned over 5 years and teaching probably hundreds of students as a TA. And then as a bonus point, we're gonna talk about common mistakes of first-year students that I thought that I did and some other students were doing. And then I'm going to present a small summary of everything. So let me move to the first slide, high school versus medical school. I assume many of you might come out directly from high school. And when you first enter medical school, and you will see that in your first week probably, you will see that things are a little bit different because you're going to be in a university. And the big difference between school and university is oftentimes when you're in school, you have your teacher, he's writing something down, you're copying it. And when you're in university, you have a lot of resources that you can use. You're much more independent. You're expected to study by yourself. And yeah, that's basically it. So you need to figure out things, how to do things by yourself. This is the biggest difference, I feel like, from high school versus medical school. On top of that, medical school is much, much harder. Not necessarily from a qualitative aspect, but much more from a quantitative aspect. Because let's be real, you're gonna have to study a lot. You're gonna have a lot of material to learn, and it can be quite overwhelming in the beginning, at least. So, but let me be a little bit more philosophical at the beginning. Before we start, I think as a general topic that you always need to address is always, what is your ultimate goal in medical school? That's not just for the first year students, but also for second, third, fourth year students. Because is your goal, or let me rephrase this, is your goal to get an A in every subject or to become a teaching assistant? Or is your goal something completely else? You want to have a nice life next to medical school and just want to pass the exams and still want to be a good physician? Or do you want to go for the USMLE if you're a third-year student? Then you're studying and how you approach med school can vary a bit. So just keep that in mind. That might be a little bit confusing maybe now as a first-year student, but once you get into second, third, fourth year, those questions make much, much more sense. And you will come back and maybe that slide will make some more sense to you. Okay. Now let's directly delve into the very important questions. How do I actually choose my study resources? First of all, I look at it in 3 steps. You should always have an overview of what resources are actually available for you as a first-year student, a second-year student, and you should apply certain filters, because I don't have to tell you that it doesn't make sense to use every book that there is that is recommended, but it's much more useful to just pick a few, stick to them, and learn from them, because this is also a very common mistake, and I will come to it at the end again, of a lot of first-year students, that they will start to buy every book that is recommended from the anatomy teacher, me included. I think I had 3 atlases. I had the Gray's Anatomy, the Moore's Clinical Anatomy, Netter, Sobota, and much, much more books. And this was also a mistake that I did, that I was just too over-motivated, was directly buying a lot of books from my peers or new from the bookshop, and I didn't really know what to do. I started to study the same topic from 3 different books. So I'm here to tell you that that's not the best way. Usually anatomy books are very similar, and they don't have so much differences in between each other. And you should be very careful how you choose your resources. But more importantly, it's the quantitative aspect that you're not choosing too many books. I will get to it all the time, again and again in this presentation. And before I'm going to talk more about it and give you maybe some concrete example, I want to introduce you to a principle. This is called the Pareto Principle. Maybe some of you are already familiar with it. The Pareto Principle is basically somehow called universal principle in life that was originally based on some Italian economist, I believe, that basically that principle basically states that, and if you now convert it to medical school, is that basically the 20% of the things you're doing lead to the 80% of your results. Because you can basically study just the most important 20%, and the chances are high that it will cover 80% of the material that you need to know for the final exam. How does this translate for us? As I said again, it means that you don't choose too many resources, that you should stick to your resources, again, within reason. If you see that one of the resources is not working for you, you don't like it, feel free to switch it up and take another book. And it should be always based around the question of what is required of me. Because when you're studying, you have all types of different materials. You have textbooks that are very big and very thin, to easily say it. And if you know what is required of you, you have a much more understanding of how deep you have to go into a certain topic. Let me give an example. So what I did here, if you can see that, is basically I just copy pasted the recommended literature for anatomy. I think it's from the SIS. I did it 2 years ago. And how you would use the 80-20 principle in this case would basically just choosing a selected few of those resources that are available and then sticking to them. Usually for anatomy, and I don't want to get now too specific because this should be just more some general talk, you would want to have one atlas, one textbook, and then based on that you can dive into different directions and see what else you need. But the basic gist that I'm trying to tell you here is that you should not buy all the textbooks that are available, but just really stick to a few and really then just stick to them. Because in first year, what I was that, and I see many of my first year students that I see in a library, for example, where that they just have 3 different atlases with the same topic, and then they were just going from atlas to atlas and looking at the same thing. So you should be ideally avoiding that. And how do you then actually know what the right resources are? That's easy. You should generally try to find somebody, a mentor. That's usually somebody from second or higher years. That can be your teacher in anatomy, that can be your professor in anatomy, and you can ask them for some advice and what they generally recommend. Then you make some summary, and based on that and your personal preferences, you would usually want to choose the resources that fit you well. Okay. So this was just the first point about the general, how to choose your resources. And as a second point, and this is going to be the longer part of my study, of my presentation, it will be how to actually study. When we are talking about how to study, I generally like to approach it from 2 perspectives. Because as you know, there is something called passive studying and active studying. Passive studying, you can imagine, is something like reading a newspaper. You're reading the newspaper, you open it, and then you're reading it, skimming through it. And active studying, on the other hand, is something completely different. You are not just reading it, but you're actually doing something with that information. As you might already guess, what we want to do in medical school is try to err on the side of active studying more than on the side of passive studying, because that is going to this is the best way how we ingrain information into our brain. So Before I keep continuing about active studying, I would like to first define what is passive studying and what do we want to avoid with that. And I will talk about each one of those points in a bit. I hope you can see that it's a bit small, but passive studying and what we will ultimately want to avoid is basically just reading something. So imagine you have your histology textbook and you're just reading from page to page. You might be highlighting some stuff and you're saying, yes, that's interesting, that's interesting. You go to the next page, highlighting some more. And this is usually the way how we want to avoid studying. And I will show you in a second what you can do instead. Passive studying is also when you're not paying attention to that subject. That means studying while you're eating, while you're watching TV. I know my girlfriend and other females always tell me they're very good at multitasking. I'm terrible at multitasking, but I believe also for those people very good at multitasking, they should just focus on one thing. So if you're just studying, I would recommend you to put your phone away into a different corner of your room or back into or in your backpack, and then just focusing what is ahead of you. Studying just right before the exam, that's not really a passive studying, but I would just put it also in the category of bad study habits, where you're just trying to cram everything just directly before the exam. You can see that phenomenon a lot just before the final exams, a few weeks before the anatomy exams, that suddenly people start to study for the first time everything that they had missed out in the winter semester. And as you guess, this is of course not the ideal way. Passive studying and a bad study habits is also not enough sleep. Medical students, doctors in general, they try and they are priding themselves of running on low amounts of sleep. I think that is an ego thing, and reality is, and if you look at actual studies, it's proven that if you sleep too little, and it can already be chronic sleep deprivation from 6 hours a night, you will have tremendous problems recalling things. So a good study habit would be to have an appropriate amount of sleep every day, 7 to 8 hours. Of course, that differs individually. And there are books written on that, and you can read it up. But that's generally a comment that I want to give from me. So I was teaching histology, anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology, basically all the subjects. I had an A in all of my exam, and I never had to sleep less than 6 hours. And other colleagues of mine that are also very good are usually not sleeping less than 7 hours, because sleeping is very, very important for the process of when you're just reading something to bring it into your long-term memory. And I just said that rant about me just so you would believe me maybe a little bit more, not to pride myself. And another point that might seem obvious at first are unhealthy diets. But I just want to mention that because you might hear that all the time, again and again. But if you're really just eating junk food all the time, ordering from Volt or Dami Yiglo when you're studying, I know I did it myself too, but if this is what majority of your diet consists of, you don't have to wonder why you're chronically tired, why you can't remember things, and having a good, well-balanced diet can really help you. And probably if my girlfriend would be hearing that, she would be laughing because she knows how much I like to order food. But I would just wanted to put that out there. And okay, you can read the rest. So now that we defined what is passive studying and what are bad study habits, I would like to define what is active studying. How should you approach studying when you're going to med school? I will break it up to 3 points and basically 3 study techniques, and you can figure out what works best for you. Studying is a long-term process, an active process, and you need to, at the end, figure out what works for you. But never be afraid to change your studying. I'm in my 6th year, and I had over 20, 30 exams here in this faculty, in life in general, and I'm still trying to improve my studying all the time. And I think you should be doing that too, because again, studying and learning how to study is an active process. It's a fine-tuning, and Okay. Good. So let's jump to the first point, answering final questions. So what do I mean by that? And what are final questions? If you're a first year student and you're in the first weeks of the university, you might not even know what final questions are. But for all those that don't know it, I just want to recap it for you. It's basically, you have an exam at the end of the year, at the end of the semester, and how will they control that, the subjects? You have something called final questions. They're basically just a list of topics that you can be asked on in your exam. At the first faculty of medicine, this is usually in an oral exam. So what you will see people talking about is answering final questions. That basically means is that they're usually printing out the list of final questions and answering them. Answering them meaning basically for themselves, they are studying that they are studying the topic. And that can be, for example, when I was in first year and I was studying anatomy or histology, what I would usually do is I would take just one page of paper and I would try to answer the question, meaning I had a question on the heart and vasculature of the heart, and I would make some notes of the most important things that I want to say in the exam that I need to know. Okay, I had to mute him. And this is basically what we mean with answering final questions. Usually in anatomy, and again, I don't want to get now too specific, it makes sense that for each final questions you have some scheme that you drew yourself, because anatomy is a very complex subject. It is a subject that requires you to think in 3D, to visualize it in your head. So if you're drawing, you're doing yourself a huge favor, because not only does it help you to study it and to learn the material, but also when you're going then to the final exam, that you can draw that easy scheme to your professor and explain it based on that. And that's usually the best way how to go about it. Now, specifically for anatomy, of course, you can't draw all the time. There are concepts in physiology, in clinical anatomy, in clinical medicine in general, where you can't just draw, where you have to use other modalities. But this was just an illustration what I mean with answering final question and what it means. And as you can see here is the difference between passive studying would be just reading something about the vasculature of the heart, of the bones, and an active way of studying would be actually taking that information that you just read and then resynthesizing it in your own words. Okay, if something doesn't make sense, you're actually feel free. We are not that many people this time to just ask some questions. That's absolutely no problem. If something doesn't make sense, and I'll try to answer it or elaborate more on that. The next point, next to answering final question, are group sessions. Group sessions is, as I wrote it here, is, or let me give you an example. When I was studying in first year or when I was studying in second year, we had a habit with my friends of meeting up in the library. We would study on our own for the first few hours, and then after let's say 4 p.m. we're meeting all downstairs in the common discussion rooms, and we were back then 3 of us, and we would quiz each other and present to each other different topics. So for example, that could be any random topic, and one would be presenting it in front of the group, the other ones would be asking questions about that. And as you can see here, this is a very active way of studying, because now when you're forced to teach something, you have to really understand the material. You cannot just say what you read, but presenting something and teaching something is really an active learning process, which requires you beforehand to know the material very well, and at the same time it shows you where you didn't understand things. And oftentimes, based on that, you only see what you know and what you don't know. And usually I recommend students to keep those group sessions to maximum 3, 4 in total, because I believe that if you're groups of 5, 6, 7, these sessions usually become too much, and you don't get the full benefit. So try ideally to find to be just 2 or maximum 3 students that are going to talk about a topic. And I made here a reference about the Feynman technique. You can Google what it is. I don't want to elaborate on all those different things here, but it basically referring to the fact that very complex topics can be and should be presented in a very easy way. Because if you're able to really present a very complex topic in very simple, easy words, then you really understood it. Okay. La crème de la crème, flashcards. Let me just elaborate on that. I myself just started with flashcards when I was my 2nd and my 3rd year. And I hear it often from my friends that they wish that they would have started with flashcards much earlier in their career. So what are flashcards? You might know from high school or so that what those paper flashcards are, where you basically have a paper, and then in the front you have, for example, when you were learning French vocabulary, you had your word in your language in the front, and then on the back you had the answer, and you could quiz yourself on that. Flashcards are actually a very, very good tool how to keep things into your brain, how to memorize things. And I would like to show you what I mean by that, and how you can actually apply it to your study, even in 1st year with anatomy and histology, because flashcards can be used really throughout your study. And now what I will try to do is, instead of just continuing with the PowerPoint, I would like to share my screen with you, share my flashcard program, and I would need some feedback just for you to tell me if you can see my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anki is usually the go-to flashcard system that most people are using. I believe it is actually the best one. There are many other different flashcard programs. I'm in no way affiliated with Anki, but if you're looking for it, it's on Mac. So it's an App Store and a Google Store. You can just download it. And I want to show you how it basically is. So you have here this web application, Anki. And I'm just going to show you now a walkthrough of how you would do that. So here you can see my decks that I have. I have many different decks. I deleted a lot of decks over the years. I have a deck here for Czech, for internal medicine, because that's my upcoming exam. But the way how you would usually want to go about it is, if you're going to create, first of all, you downloaded it, you started the app, etc., etc. This is going to be your interface, of course, without all those texts, and you would start here to create your deck, and we can say here anatomy winter semester, for example, right? And then when you click on the deck, there are a lot of functions which I'm unfortunately not able to show you all today in that session, but I have a lot of recommended literature on the last slide. So just bear with me. I just try to show you the basic principle of it. Is here you can go back to your decks, and here you can add a card. And analogous to how the paper flashcard would work, like you have a front and you have a back side. Okay. So how could it work? So for example, if you would have here a muscle, you could take here a screenshot, go back to your flashcard program and put it on the back. See what I did there? You already have now some answer on the back page, and now you can ask yourself for the biceps muscle, for example, what is the innervation? Or if you want to save your time, you can just ask yourself innervation ? And you should know what you want to know, because they're your own cards. Or you can ask yourself, for example, oh, let's take it like that. And then you can post it again, biceps, and you can you ask yourself something else? For example, origin and insertion. So I just did now 2 cards, and let us see how that will look like now. So when you go now to study those cards, you see you have 2 fresh cards. And then you have on the front page, basically the question, biceps muscle, what is the innervation? And then you can ask yourself, what is it? Musculocutaneous, right? Ah, you got it right. And then you can, based on the system, you can actually say, is it hard? Was it good? And easy. And based on your choice, this will be the interval you're going to see the card again. So let's see, I already knew that because some people told it to me already. I somehow remember it good. So this will be easy. Then you have the question biceps, origin and insertion. What was it again? You click on the back, and let's say this time you didn't know it. So you press on again. And then in 25 minutes, this deck will reload, and you can repeat a card that you didn't know. So this is just the basic principle of the flashcards, and you should have now just gotten an idea of what I'm talking about. Of course, there are a lot of more details that go into it, and there are many videos on YouTube that you can watch that can be very helpful to really dive into that topic deeper. Another feature that I would really like to show here is, let me see, I had some, sorry, this is German. This is the German Amboss. You can use basically anything. And I want to show you now why it is so good for anatomy. Because if you just take here a screenshot, and then you go here, you enter it. Wait, no, that's not here. No, this one. I have to do it 1 second. You can see anatomy is already a long time ago when I don't know how to use that function anymore. Yes, here basically. So this is an add-on that you can get from Anki, and this is basically called image occlusion. And what you're going to do here is, with that simple field, you can put here some bars, and then you can quiz yourself with flashcards later on. And you can see 3 cards were just added. Then you go onto your anatomy deck, and then you have the front card like that. And then you have to quiz yourself, what is the anatomical structure? You can see arteria pulmonalis dextra, that was it. And then you can tell if it was easy or not. Again. So this was the general idea of all right, let me go back to the presentation, and sorry if you see yourself speak. And go back to my presentation. So this was basically just a very short introduction into Anki as an
Christian, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Did you find Anki helpful in all the years, not just first year?
I'm using it in every subject.
Okay, so you used it throughout
yeah, to be very honest with you, I didn't use it in first year because I just didn't know about it. I always tell my anatomy students that they should use Anki, and many of them are using it successfully. So I know for a fact it's working. And yeah, but I would say the thing without Anki is there is of course a lot of ways how to also do it wrong. There are people who start with it and then maybe it's for them too complicated, or they do too many cards and can't keep up with all the cards. It's of course, with every technical thing, there's a lot of downsides to it, but I believe overall it's a very good study tool. It's a very good add-on to your studying. You should be always careful not to do too many cards, because I know people that do 100 cards a day, new. And then you always have to remind yourself, because then you will have 100 cards to review in the next day. And at some point it can get very overwhelming. And so there's a right way and a wrong way how to use Anki, but this is a whole another story, and which would really exceed the capacity of this short seminar. But I would say that Anki and flashcards in general are a very good study material for information that is very information heavy, such as anatomy, such as histology, where you just need to know, or just need to know really the facts that are maybe very hard to memorize and that you have to see many, many times before you really understand it. And with other subjects such as physiology, where you have to have an inherent understanding of the topic, Anki might not be the best way for everything, but it's maybe much easier that you write it on the paper down, the physiological principles, so you know you really understood it. So there I would go more to the first part, to answering the final question, writing it down in your own way, just to see if you understood the concept. But again, I would always use Anki from time to time, even in those instances, and because in medicine there's always things that you need to remember. And yeah, so this was my Anki rant. I think that's already enough. The only thing that I can tell you now at this point is Anki is great. It works. Try it out and just give it a try. It's very helpful if you know how to use it. You can download it here. And the add-on was called Image Occlusion, but there are many, many more add-ons that you can use. So just play around with it, take your time. And I would like also to mention a side note on that. Usually I had a different slide in this presentation a few years ago, but I think I can just draw it here on the whiteboard, and I hope you can see the whiteboard in a second. That's very nice here. So can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so if you assume this is just a graph, right? And if this topic of now is memory, there is called, okay, that's my, if the topic is now memory, there is something called the forgetting course. The forgetting curve. It was originally described by, I think, a German physiologist or something 100 years ago. But it basically states that if you have on your x-axis time, and on the y-axis the amount in percentage of the things that you remember about something that you studied, the relationship and how your memory works can be described like that. So let's say at time 0, this is a 0, you learn something. So when you learn something, anatomical fact, you're at 100%, right? You just studied it, and you should have the memory in your head. But as you go along with time, your memory of what you study is going to decline. And this point, usually I think it was like 25%, is usually, of course it depends from person to person, usually around 30 days. And this is just how the mind, how the memory is working like. And now I want to introduce you to a very short concept called spaced repetition. Because what it's basically meaning is that through short episodes of reviewing your material, you can change the trajectory of that curve. So let's say, if this would represent your knowledge about the muscles of the forearm, you see that after some time you will forget everything. And this is not good. What I'm basically saying here is that you should repeat the stuff, because by repeating, you can actually shift the curve again back to 100%, and the steepness of the curve will change with each consecutive repetition. It will become less and less steep, to the point that it's really in your long-term memory, and you hopefully don't forget as much as you would have in the beginning. So that's a nice theoretical concept. Why am I showing it to you? Do I want you to repeat all the 270 questions 10 times? No, of course, that's not really possible. But the concept that I wanted to introduce you here is a concept of spaced repetition, and at the same time, the explanation why Anki is such a great tool. Because the flashcard and Anki itself have the system that by you saying this card is easy, the inherent algorithm will show you the card again at defined intervals. The more you repeat a card, the longer the intervals is. So Anki is working with that concept of spaced repetition and how your mind is working by giving you the cards that you have problems memorizing all the time. So you're seeing some cards maybe 10 times, you're seeing other cards only 3 times. And by having that system, you're making sure that things are staying in your long-term memory. Because unfortunately, we are no robots. We have to repeat the stuff in order for it to stick in our brain. So that was it. That was just a small thing here. I'm gonna return to my presentation. And so that was the concept about flashcards and in general terms. So the study session, how should a general study session look like? First of all, I have to mention it again. I know it gets boring, but I have to say that good sleep, good nutrition, etc., are always the foundation of everything, right? If you just partied the whole night and just had 2 hours of sleep, you will not be very productive. Your mind is not going to work, and you will not be able to remember a lot of things. Easy as that. Location. There are many students who study at home. There are many students who study in different coffee places. There are many students studying in libraries. At the end, it really doesn't matter, and it's really up to you. It's your individual preference where you like to study. And but I would just say, if you have problems studying when other people are around, then maybe just go to a quieter place and see what's working for you. But also don't be afraid to change things up. I myself, I was in the library in first year every day, because I thought that's what students do, that's what medical students do, and this is what the good place. Nowadays, in my 6th year, I'm rarely in libraries because I just don't like to travel so long to the libraries. From time to time, I might still go there, but usually I will study at home, or I will study in different coffee places. Study sessions. How long should you study? And it's no wonder that with time that you study, your concentration will also decline, similar to the graph like your memory. With some time, your concentration is going to decline, and also your capacity to learn new things. What I want to say with that is basically try to experiment with 25, 45, 60, 90-minute study session and see what works for you. Many people say that the 25 study sessions, like really intense bursts of just 25 minutes of studying, the so-called Pomodoro technique, works very well for them. Other people, myself included, I like to study in 60-minute blocks rather than just 25-minute blocks. And in those study sessions, you don't look at your phone, you just study. And after that, you have your well-earned break. Depending, of course, how long these individual study sessions are, your breaks should be can be either 5, 10, 15, 25 minutes. For me personally, what works for me is that I usually study for 1 hour. I take a 10-minute break, I study for 1 hour. I take a 10-minute break, and then I take another hour, and then I usually have a very long break. This is just how I like to study, and in those 3 hours, I'm usually quite effective, and that might be all I'm doing the whole day. Again, you can see it's not the first time that I'm mentioning it here in my presentations. I'm not a big fan of all-nighters, because all-nighters fight against the principle of really how your memory is working. You are all-nighters might be very useful if you have an anatomy exam on the next day and you didn't study anything that might help you to pass the exam in the short term, but really looking at it on a long-term scale, you you really want the long-term memory, and you want to have the material not just for one day, but ideally for long-term, so you're able to reproduce that material also later on. So that's why all-nighters are usually not the way to go. But in contrast, it is much better to really study every day a little bit and make sure that you manage your chunks of study. Okay, we're slowly going towards the end. I promise it will be not much more than an hour, because you guys might have something to do or not. Just what are some common first-year mistakes? Just keep in mind, I was also not a perfect student. I'm not a perfect student now, and we all do mistakes, but this is just over the years that I thought, and talking with other peers, that I just saw occurring again and again. So the first mistake is studying too little. Of course, this goes without saying. First year is very hard, and your focus should be really on passing the exam, on surviving the first year. And then I would always err on the side of studying too much in first year, because once you finish the first year and know how the things are working, then you can really loosen the screw and can give yourself more time. Then another problem on the whole other spectrum is studying too much. That was certainly my category when I was in first year. When I was in the first year in Prague, I didn't even see the Christmas market. I didn't have time to go out to meet friends. Looking back at it, I think it was a little bit extreme, and I definitely changed it up in my second or third year. I studied much, much less, but I just wanted to show you that this can also be, on the other side of things, a problem, that if you're studying too much. Another very practical mistake that people are doing, and a practical tip then at the same time, is doing your first final exam too late and postponing your exam. You are going to sign up for your exam, meaning that you're going to be provided with exam dates, and you can choose. You have the freedom of choosing your exam date. There are many students who will choose an exam date, and 2 days before they chicken out and take the date 1 month later. You will see that there are not endless amount of free dates that you will have, especially later on at the end of first year in the summer semester. And I would recommend anyone to really take one exam, one subject, finish it early in June, and then do the second exam. Don't do your first attempt in August and September. I was talking a lot with our previous vice dean, Professor Sedmera, and we were looking at the data of our first year students, and we saw that most first year students don't fail because they fail the third attempt. No, they fail because they don't show up to the exam, because they don't have enough time to be able to take all the exams in time, because they just keep postponing it. So the tip here is really take the exam early. Don't be afraid. You can't know everything, and sometimes it's just good to go for it. Another example is, of course, and that goes to those people that are studying too much, is that you think that you need to know everything. You can't know everything. You're not supposed to know everything. You're supposed to know a lot. You're not supposed to know a lot about the important information. And this is what is, in the end, very important. Another notion about Ritalin. For those who don't know what's Ritalin, it's good. You don't have to know about it. But for those who know about it, I recommend you not to become dependent on Ritalin. There are many medical students who start to take Ritalin, especially in their final exam weeks. This is absolutely not necessary, and this is not a long-term solution. Most students who are good are not taking it, and I would recommend you to not take it because it's not long-term sustaining. And you should be able, and if you need Ritalin to pass the exam, you're already having some problems of studying, and you should rather look on how you're studying and how you approach the whole thing rather than having some band-aid solutions. That's all I'm going to say about that. Studying from too many resources. Again, I already mentioned it, I think, a couple of times. Not knowing how to study. Learning how to study is a long-term process. You will do mistakes all the time, especially in first year. This goes without saying. I see myself in this position today just to point you into the right direction, nothing else. You can go back to the slides and go to the recommended further literature, but at the end, it's a lot about experience as well. You will get better and with time, and that's totally normal. Another problem that I see a lot with the first year students in particular, or other students as well, are just of organizational nature, that they just don't know what is expected of them in the exam, that they don't know how much they have to know. And I will mention maybe a little bit more on the next slide. So just some remarks at the end. After the first year in general, I can just say that survive it. It does get better. And by that, I mean you get better. The subjects might still be hard, but learning how to learn and learning how to deal with it and how to approach things and how to get better with organizational things will help you tremendously in your upcoming years. For me, every year personally was easier and easier because you just got better and better, if that makes sense. Again, I can't stress it enough. Don't postpone your exam. Do one exam early in June, pass it, and do the next one. So you have a summer. And don't do your first attempt late. I would recommend you do it early, no matter what, and try to prepare for it. Look at the final. Another common problem that I didn't wrote in the last slide is that people don't look at the final questions early enough. Ideally, every subject that you have as exam has a list of final questions. So what you should be doing is before you start to study, you should just look at the list of final questions, see if it's up to date, print it out and put it next to you, because this is what your exam is going to be about, nothing else. And if you don't work with the final questions, like I did, for example, for a long time in my first year, the more problems you have and the more overwhelmed you will feel. Take your final questions and start to work with them from the very beginning. So by the time you're going to take the exam, nothing is going to be new. Just as a general reminder, you can have a good life outside of med school, even in first year, and you don't need to sacrifice your whole life. What I see with many students is that they start to sacrifice all the hobbies that they had before. They were playing piano, they were going to the gym 3 times a week. I believe those extracurricular activities are very, very important, and you should definitely keep up with them and keep doing them, because it's very important for your mental health and to really be really stable. And at the end, I would like to say that, of course, grades are not everything. At the end, depending what you want to do, other things become much more important. And this is, of course, now this last point is not really for the first year students, but maybe for the second, third, fourth, fifth year students. I just want to mention that by the time you're applying for your job after medical school, other things and not just the grades are important. And I'm saying that also to myself, because I thought it for a long time that grades are everything, that you have to have an A in every exam, and that's definitely not true. At the end, other things, depending on your specialty, can be much more important, such as getting involved in research and having your publications early on. I don't want to stress you that you think you have to have some publications early in second year and first year. That's absolutely not what I'm saying, but that's just a general notion that I'm giving you here. Internships in the places where you want to work at are very important. Teaching activities, all that stuff, all those extracurricular stuff are at the end much more important than the actual grades. So also don't be frustrated when you get a C or B in the final exam. That's not what is defining you, and it's not what's going to make or break your job application later on. But I think, yeah, that's all I want to say with that point. Summary, or what to do when you get home. Maybe you're already at home, probably. General, don't study. It's Friday night, so even if you're first year, and it's not an excuse to now study. Take the time off, go out and meet some friends. Then when you're fresh the next day, on Sunday, Saturday, go back, review the notes from this seminar, have a look at the last slide that I will provide you at the further reading section, and just start from there. Then again, as a general tip, set aside each week some time to organize the next week or the next month. So you really get into the habit of planning ahead and get really good at it. I personally, every Sunday, I take 1-2 hours and try to plan my week ahead, because I have a lot of classes. I also have a lot of extracurricular activities, and time management becomes much more important the more things you're doing. I'm mentioning it again. Learning is a lifelong skill. You will not master it in first year, nor have I mastered it in my 5 years here in university. And don't get frustrated. Don't give up. Don't give up on those flashcards just because in the first time you didn't get the hang of it. Just keep trying, and with each time it will get better. Okay. And don't think that just somebody got an A or is apparently seems smarter to you that they actually are. I think smartness is something that is overemphasized, and that's not really existing too much. To be able, I was a terrible student in high school. Now that I got to university, I had an A basically in all the exams. But I don't think that my smartness somehow changed throughout the years. What did change was that I had much more interest in the stuff that I was studying, that I knew how to approach, how to study, that I was continuously trying to get better. And I think this is for everyone. This is how you should be really looking at it. And then this is the recommended further reading section. You can take a picture or later on just have a look at the presentations again and check those resources out. I personally really can recommend the Medschool Insiders YouTube channel that helped me tremendously when I was a young medical student. It's basically an ex-plastic surgeon who was in the US, who was giving medical school and all around the world tips on how to approach studying, how to go about it. And he has like hundreds of videos with like all those fine nuances that I was unfortunately not able to clarify today. But this is again just an introduction. I would like to invite you to check out the further reading section. And this is actually it from my part. I'm going to close now the recording, so feel free, and I would be happy to see more faces here. And I am now open for more questions.